Every Amish quilt contains a deliberate imperfection hidden somewhere in its pattern. A single block turned wrong, a color misplaced, a stitch pattern broken. This isn't carelessness but sacred tradition. The reason behind these intentional flaws reveals profound beliefs about perfection, pride, and what it means to be human. The humility block tradition. Walk into any Amish home where quilts are displayed, and you're looking at works of remarkable craftsmanship. The geometric patterns align with mathematical precision. The colors balance perfectly. The stitching creates uniform texture. Everything appears flawless. But hidden somewhere in each quilt is a deliberate imperfection. A single block rotated wrong, one piece in the wrong color, a break in the stitch pattern. This isn't accident. It's the humility block, a sacred tradition practiced across Amish communities for generations. The imperfection might be obvious or so subtle that only the maker knows exactly where it is. The practice varies by community, but the principle remains consistent. No human should create something perfect because perfection belongs to God alone. This tradition passes from mother to daughter through demonstration. A young girl watches her mother deliberately turn a block the wrong direction. When the girl questions this apparent mistake, the mother explains the spiritual reasoning. The lesson becomes embedded in muscle memory, repeated hundreds of times across a lifetime of quilting. The humility block serves multiple purposes simultaneously: theological statement, teaching tool, community identifier, and psychological release from the impossible burden of perfectionism. Only God is perfect. The theological foundation supporting the humility block tradition rests on a simple belief: only God is perfect, and for humans to create perfect work is to claim equality with the divine. This amounts to the sin of pride, considered the most dangerous of all sins because pride caused Lucifer's fall from heaven. This belief shapes Amish life far beyond quilting. It explains their rejection of higher education, which might lead to intellectual pride. It influences their plain dress, preventing pride in appearance. The humility block is merely one visible manifestation of a theological principle that permeates every aspect of Amish existence. The deliberate flaw functions as a constant reminder of human limitation. Every time an Amish woman looks at a quilt she's made, she sees not just her skill, but also acknowledgement that her skill has limits. She cannot achieve perfection. She should not strive for it. This theology offers a radically different perspective from mainstream American culture, which celebrates perfectionism. The Amish counter that such striving is spiritually harmful, leading to pride when one succeeds and despair when one fails. Better to acknowledge limitations from the start and find peace in being perfectly imperfect. The sin of pride. In Amish theology, pride isn't just one sin among many, but the root from which other sins grow. Pride leads to vanity. Pride creates competition that destroys community. Pride makes individuals believe they're self-sufficient rather than dependent on God. Therefore, fighting pride requires constant vigilance and deliberate practices. The humility block serves as built-in defense against pride that naturally wells up when creating something beautiful. An Amish woman might spend 200 hours hand quilting a complex pattern. When she completes it, natural human reaction is satisfaction, even pride. The deliberate imperfection interrupts that pride, reminding her that the work is not perfect. This practice also serves community function. Other women examining the quilt can find the humility block and recognize that the maker has properly submitted her work to the theological principle. A quilt without deliberate imperfection would raise concerns about the maker's spiritual state. Teaching children about pride begins early through examples like the humility block. Young girls learn that their worth isn't measured by perfect achievement but by proper relationship with God and community. Historical origins of the practice. Tracing the exact origins of the humility block tradition proves difficult because Amish culture relies on oral transmission rather than written documentation. Scholars debate whether the practice is ancient or relatively recent, and whether it originated with the Amish or was borrowed from other traditions. Similar practices appear in other religious craft traditions. Islamic rug makers sometimes leave deliberate flaws, believing only Allah can create perfection. Navajo weavers incorporate spirit lines. Some Jewish scribes writing sacred texts follow rules acknowledging human inability to reproduce divine perfection. The earliest documented references to Amish humility blocks appear in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but absence of earlier documentation doesn't prove the practice didn't exist. The Amish resistance to academic study means many practices existed long before outsiders documented them. Regional variations exist in how the practice manifests. Lancaster County communities maintain very strict adherence. Some Midwest communities practice it less consistently. These variations reflect that Amish communities are not monolithic, but distinct groups with different standards. Types of deliberate imperfections. The methods Amish women use to introduce deliberate imperfections vary in visibility and technique. The most common method is the turned block, where one block in a repeating pattern gets rotated, breaking the overall symmetry. This creates visual disruption ranging from obvious to subtle, depending on the pattern. Color variation represents another popular method. In a quilt where all blocks use the same color scheme, one block might contain a single piece in the wrong color. The substitution might be dramatic or subtle depending on the maker's choice. Stitch pattern breaks occur in the quilting itself rather than the pieced top. Most of the quilt might feature consistent diagonal stitching, but in one area the stitches might change direction. This type of imperfection is often visible only upon close inspection. Size variation is more difficult to detect. One block might be cut slightly larger or smaller, creating subtle asymmetry. This type of deliberate flaw requires the rest of the quilt to accommodate the variation through careful adjustments. The visibility varies based on purpose. Some are obvious teaching tools, others are nearly invisible, representing personal humility practiced between maker and God alone. The spiritual lesson for children. Mothers teaching daughters to quilt find the humility block provides powerful teaching moment. A young girl naturally wants to do everything correctly, creating work she can be proud of. When her mother instructs her to deliberately place a block incorrectly, confusion follows. Why would we make a mistake on purpose? The explanation becomes formative spiritual instruction. The mother explains that only God is perfect, that humans cannot achieve perfection, that the deliberate flaw acknowledges their limitation. As understanding develops over years, the deeper lesson takes root. We are not meant to be perfect. This teaching extends beyond quilting into fundamental Amish psychology. Girls learn to accept their physical imperfections, resisting cultural pressures toward beauty perfectionism. They learn that their worth comes from relationship with God and community, not from flawless achievement. The contrast with modern perfectionism is stark. Contemporary culture demands carefully curated presentations, hiding all flaws. The Amish practice offers radically different approach. Permission to be flawed, acknowledgement that everyone is imperfect, freedom from exhausting perfectionism, community, accountability. The Amish community structure includes mechanisms for monitoring and correcting pride, with the humility block serving as one visible marker of proper humility. Women observe each other's quilts, noting whether deliberate imperfections are present and appropriate. A quilt that appears too perfect might prompt gentle questions or expressions of concern about the maker's spiritual state. Is she becoming proud of her skill? Has she forgotten the principle that only God creates perfect work? Exceptional talent creates particular spiritual danger in this framework. A woman with remarkable quilting skill produces beautiful work almost effortlessly. The temptation toward pride in her ability is stronger than for someone with modest talent. The community watches such women carefully, ensuring their skill doesn't lead to spiritual corruption through pride. The talented quilter must demonstrate extra humility, perhaps making her deliberate imperfections more obvious or limiting how complex her patterns become. Deliberately holding back one's full ability becomes spiritual practice. Stories circulate within communities about proud quilters who were corrected. A woman creates a quilt so perfect so complex, so obviously displaying her superior skill that the community must intervene. The bishop might speak with her privately, other women might offer gentle corrections. The quilter must demonstrate renewed humility, perhaps by creating simpler quilts or making her imperfections more visible. These stories serve as warnings about the spiritual dangers of exceptional achievement. The practice of leaving quilts unsigned reflects related values about anonymity and rejecting individual recognition. While some Amish quilters do sign their work, many do not, preferring that the quilt glorify God rather than draw attention to the maker's skill. The work exists to serve practical and aesthetic purposes, not to build the maker's reputation. This anonymity, combined with deliberate imperfection, creates double protection against pride. The work acknowledges its own imperfection, and the maker claims no individual credit for creating it. Practical benefits of imperfection. Beyond theological justification, the humility block tradition offers practical, psychological, and economic benefits. Releasing the pressure to achieve perfection allows faster project completion. A quilter who knows she'll deliberately place an imperfection somewhere doesn't need to agonize over making every element absolutely perfect. This reduces stress during creation and allows her to finish more projects, generating more income if she sells quilts. The practice serves as teaching tool for patience and perspective. The goal isn't perfection, but completion of useful, beautiful work. Process matters more than product. Finding joy in creation itself, rather than in achieving flawless results, makes the work sustainable over a lifetime. Preventing perfectionism before it develops into obsessive behavior protects mental health and allows normal human limitations without shame. Defining done becomes simpler with imperfection built into the standard. Without a perfect ideal, the quilter can complete work, declare it finished, and move on to the next project without endless revisions and corrections. This allows healthy productivity rather than paralysis from perfectionist standards that can never be fully satisfied. The economic consideration is significant. Faster completion means more quilts available for sale, more inventory generates more income. For families dependent on women's craft income to supplement farming revenue, the efficiency enabled by accepting imperfection has real financial impact. The time saved by not pursuing perfection can be devoted to starting the next quilt rather than endlessly refining the current one. An interesting irony has emerged in the collector market for Amish quilts. Outsiders who understand the humility block tradition specifically seek quilts with documented, deliberate imperfections. These quilts command higher prices because the imperfection certifies authenticity and connection to genuine Amish tradition. The market commodifies spiritual practice, creating a situation where pride and humility becomes possible. Amish quilters selling to tourists face temptation to highlight their humility blocks, performing humility for an audience in ways that risk undermining the original spiritual intent. Modern challenges. Younger generations of Amish are questioning some traditional practices, including the humility block. Modern efficiency mindsets shaped by increasing contact with English culture prompt questions: why deliberately make mistakes? If God gave you skill, isn't using it fully honoring that gift? Does God really care about one block in a quilt? These questions create tension between older members defending tradition and younger people viewing it as optional rather than required. Tourism's impact on Amish life creates pressure around the humility block tradition. Outsiders asking about the imperfections force Amish quilters to explain sacred practices to curious buyers. This risks turning private spiritual practice into public performance. Some quilters feel uncomfortable highlighting their humility blocks for tourists because doing so seems to defeat the purpose of humble anonymity. The social media age presents new challenges even for Amish who don't personally use social media. Photos of their quilts get shared online by tourists and collectors. Viewers search for and discuss the imperfections, turning the humility block into object of curiosity and analysis rather than private spiritual practice. The tradition becomes spectacle, losing some of its sacred character through public exposure and commentary.